Good evening from Glasgow. We're here for our third week of writing about illness. This course is moving very fast. Thank you for all of the exercises and writing that you're sending. We just started receiving the longer pieces, and we have them from 4 members of the class. And next week, we will have 4 or 5. So we are really going into our projects now, which is terrific to see. In the meanwhile, I have been still creating prompts for you. And if you're not writing a certain week, please go ahead and do those. But I would like to see, we have 5 this week. Please attempt 3. If you can. They're quite short, and I will try to keep it like that for the remainder of the class where you don't have large word counts for those. But I do want to sort of jog your mind on these questions that are the exercises. So that's just a general note. On our subject, metaphors that move us, symbols and structures. I realize that sounds abstract. What I'm getting at this week, and this is in conversation with Sontag to a certain extent, is that we can't seem to describe illness or disability and our experiences with disease without metaphor. It's almost impossible. It is like trying to look directly at the sun. So I encourage you to reach for them and to use them. And we have different examples this week of authors who are digging into metaphor. You, in your writing, will find your own. And by that, I mean not just this literary figure of speech, the metaphor, but just a sort of larger encasing of what's behind your investigation or your experience. And that can be a sort of a sign, that can be a symbol, that can be a thing, that can be a name. And that is one piece. So something which sort of sticks out as symbolic for a larger pattern. And the other is that you have a structure, so a kind of hold all for your work, which is kind of like when you're thinking about a collection of essays or the structure of a novel or the structure of a story. There's some sort of larger framework. So those are our 2 pieces this week. I'm going to jump in with a discussion on the readings in a moment, and a little more on metaphor and what it is. We are starting with Sarah Manguso. She is writing about, in retrospect, her diagnosis of CIPD, which is a neurological disease that paralyzed her for a time, and that she still combats, and she's still being treated for. She's now in her 40s, and this happened more than 20 years ago. The story that is told in 2 Kinds of Decay. It's actually quite a slim book. It's very fast reading, and it's very compressed. She is a poet. So even though these are vignettes and they sort of read as a lyrical essay or little capsules, you can see the poetic in her work for sure. And we, next to Manguso, who is a poet, we're also going to look at Ada Limon, who I think is declaring, I mean, these are absolutely poems in the carrying, no trying to disguise them. There are a few poets, I think, who are in our group, even though they haven't spoken up so far that much, but I'm glad that they're with us, and this is for you. So this is Metaphors, which is early on in 2 Kinds of Decay, and I think I have included it in your reading this week. My blood plasma had filled with poison made by my immune system. My immune system was trying to destroy my nervous system. It was a misperception that caused me a lot of trouble. All autoimmune diseases invoke the metaphor of suicide. The body destroys itself from the inside. I secreted poison into my blood. The poison was removed and replaced with other people's blood and with chemicals. With my own blood in me, I couldn't feel and I couldn't move, but with other people's blood in me and with chemicals in me, I could do those things. The new blood became mine as soon as it entered me, or maybe it took a moment to mix with what was there, or maybe it took an hour or a day. My blood came out dirty and went in clean. It came out hot and went in cold. It came out old and went in new. And the new, cold, clean blood was better than the blood I had made myself. So she is describing the experience of transfusion there. She is also circling around autoimmune disease and this idea of something going wrong in the body and a sort of self-attack or suicide. This is deceptively simple. It's a kind of rendering of, on principle, sort of these different mechanisms that happen. I secreted poison into my blood. Well, she didn't do that literally, but her body and cells were sort of on the attack within her. The poison was removed and replaced with other people's blood and with chemicals. And it sounds quite crude. And I think that is one side of two kinds of decay. Is this system that treated her is a lot more archaic than we would expect, especially in such a technological place as Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's just a little bit on Manguso. I wonder what you'll think of her. She's got a kind of flat way of relating what's happened to her, and yet it's very aphoristic, and it has a kind of internal logic to it, which sort of fosters this inevitability. One thing, then another happens, and it's an equation, and then things sort of switch places, and she eventually emerges from this horror, being able to walk again. On metaphor, an interesting note from an essay called The Function of Metaphor by Ron Banico, who's a philosopher. It is the ability to find resemblances which ordinarily pass unnoticed. He calls it that. That is not exactly the way that maybe Manguso deals with metaphor, but it's certainly the Limon way of dealing with metaphor. So I'm going to go to her poetry and give you a couple of those, and these are also included in your reading for this week. This one is called The Raincoat. The raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me. A massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again and move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45 minutes drive to Middle 2 Rock Road and 45 minutes back from physical therapy. She'd say that even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterward. So I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio, and I saw a mom take off her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought my whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it was somehow a marvel that I never got wet. That is the recalling the recollection of a memory of Limon, and she has I think a spinal deformity, and she needed therapy as a child, and she remembers her mother driving her quite a ways to see an osteopath, and some years later, I think this is probably about 30 years later, this image of the raincoat comes back in another mother and child, and what it brings her to realize is the sacrifice that must have been part of her mother just giving up whatever she did that time to deliver her daughter to this clinic that she needed to go to, and it really touches her to see this to sort of catch that moment. Another poem by Limon called The Dream of the Raven. When the 10-speed lightweight bicycle broke down off the highway lined thick with orange trees, I noticed a great raven's head protruding from the waxy leaves. The bird was stuck somehow, mangled in the branches, crying out. Wide-eyed, I held the bird's face close to mine, beak to nose, dark brown iris to dark brown iris, feather to feather. This was not the Chihuahuan raven, or the fan-tailed raven, or the common raven. Nothing was common about the way we stared at one another while a stranger untangled the bird's claws from the tree's limbs, and he, finally free, became a naked child swinging in the wind. Beautiful encounter with actually a very common bird, but she thinks this is an uncommon moment. And she has faced off with a bird tangled and mangled in the branches. They see eye to eye, the creature and human, and the bird is in trouble. But by the end of the poem, the bird has been freed by a stranger. And this is, I think, a trend in a lot of her work where there's a kind of untangling that happens by the end. Something has unraveled partially and all hope is not lost. You will note, though, that this is the dream of the raven, and that is also where Ada Limon spends a lot of time, is in dreams, and you only catch it. It's just a very slight reference that we're in something she envisioned rather than actually experienced. But it's an interesting place to go, and actually there is no exercise for this week, but it is a part of illness because so many of us sort of go into these soporific states with medication and exhaustion, and all sorts of things can occur to us and get kind of muddled and mixed up, and it sometimes seems very prescient. And so dreams definitely belong in your writing if you're writing memoir, and maybe also if you're writing fiction, and obviously they have a natural place in poetry. So I just wanted to touch on that for a second. And then we're going to wrap up today with a very satisfying etymology from The Emperor of All Maladies. This is called A Biography of Cancer, a Portrait of Cancer by the oncologist Siddhartha Mukherjee. You have a very long excerpt, 50 pages or so, and there was more I would love to give you from this book. It's just a treasure trove as far as all the understanding, I think, to date about how this disease sort of came to the fore of scientific study, and that the fact that cancer isn't one disease at all, but many. This is from the chapter called Onkos, and you may already hear oncology in that. It was in the time of Hippocrates, around 400 BC, that a word for cancer first appeared in the medical literature, karkinos, from the Greek word for crab. The tumor, with its clutch of swollen blood vessels around it, reminded Hippocrates of a crab dug in the sand with its legs spread in a circle. The image was peculiar, for few cancers truly resemble crabs, but also vivid. Later writers, both doctors and patients, added embellishments. For some, the hardened, matted surface of the tumor was reminiscent of the tough carapace of a crab's body. Others felt a crab moving under the flesh as the disease spread stealthily throughout the body. For yet others, the sudden stab of pain produced by the disease was like being caught in the grip of a crab's pincers. Another Greek word would intersect with the history of cancer, onkos, a word used occasionally to describe tumors from which the discipline of oncology would take its modern name. Onkos was the Greek term for a mass or a load, or more commonly a burden. Cancer was imagined as a burden carried by the body. In Greek theater, the same word onkos would be used to denote a tragic mask that was often burdened with an unwieldy canonical weight on its head to denote the psychic load carried by its wearer. So that is quite fascinating. Just a little bit more here. But while the vivid metaphors might resonate with our contemporary understanding of cancer, what Hippocrates called karkinos and the disease that we now know as cancer were in fact vastly different creatures. Hippocrates' karkinos was mostly large, superficial tumors that were easily visible to the eye. Even the distinction between malignant and non-malignant tumors likely escaped Hippocrates, his carcinos included every conceivable form of swelling, nodes, carbuncles, polyps, protrusions, tubercles, pustules, and glands, lumps lumped indiscriminately into the same category of pathology. He's really trying to take that crab idea, this thing that crawls along the seabed, the sand, and to draw out every kind of crab that could possibly be affecting a sort of definition of cancer. And it's a stretch, which is interesting in itself, that it's very difficult to liken cancer to a crab. It really doesn't look anything like one, but maybe it's the hardness of a growth. Maybe it's the feeling that people have of a crab under their skin, which does make my skin crawl when I think of that. But it's this kind of imaginative leap that you have to take to connect those two things. With onkos, that idea of a mask, that is also the burden that a tragedian needs to carry on stage and then will drop at the end of the performance. That burden is the burden on the body that cancer causes, and just that idea that you're not exactly yourself, perhaps, with this disease, that there's another layer, that there's a kind of masking going on. To think about that for a while. But again, it's just sort of how do you put those words together with the thing itself? That's at the heart of metaphor, and that's where I'm going to close this week. Another quotation from The Function of Metaphor. It is precisely the fact that the metaphor poses a problem that each reader must solve for himself, which enables it to function effectively as a vehicle for meaning. And to leave you with that. So being creative, inventive, finding the resemblance, which ordinarily passes unnoticed, is sort of really the trick. So good luck with your writing, and I look forward to seeing what you produce.